Hello and welcome to episode number 57 of Behind the Impact. I'm your host, Jeremy Brown. In this episode, Tiana Austel, the Senior Manager of Employee Engagement at the eBay Foundation, joins the show. Tiana, welcome to Behind the Impact.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks so much for having me.
It is my pleasure, and I'm really excited for this conversation. We have a lot to get into, and you've been doing a lot of incredible things at the eBay Foundation. We'll get into that. But what I want to do first is to take a trip down memory lane, go back in time, and walk me through your career journey. Where did this all start for you?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So wonderful to just take a trip through my memory palace and think about how I actually ended up here. Um, it's funny. I didn't actually realize that I was a lifelong volunteer until I would think, 21 or 22. Growing up in a mixed Asian household, I was really taught to navigate my life, always thinking about where are the different needs in my community. From a very early age, I remember my mom making big meal train lists for people who just had babies or were going through surgeries. It was about, oh, our local high school, they're having an event, we should help clean up. And so it was really, instead of using the term volunteering, it was about how do we see the social fabric of both our lived community where we lived and also our ethnic community and religious community and all these different things. When I went to university, I realized that that was actually a really unique perspective. I was the type of person where I would be walking down my college campus and I'd see a piece of trash and I would pick it up and I would throw it in the trash can because I was very much in this kind of collective mindset. And I realized that there were so many people looking to build community, to really engage with each other, to find purpose. And that's how I really fell into doing a lot of employee engagement work around community building. It was realizing that so many people around me wanted to give back. They wanted to do good. They wanted to feel connected to their community in a really deep way and see what the needs were. And so I was really, really lucky. I got an internship at the wonderful company with their corporate foundation when I was a junior in college at UCLA. And it was a part-time, full-time role. And so I was really lucky back in 2016 to really be kind of in the early stages, I feel like, as we were coming together with corporate impact and CSR as it is at its current stage, and see from more of the private perspective and a family foundation and a corporate foundation, what philanthropy actually looks like for a corporation. From there, I just fell in love with corporate philanthropy. I fell in love with the idea of helping people connect to purpose at work. And so I was really lucky to get my next role at Illumina, which is a DNA sequencing company headquartered in San Diego, where I very shortly moved after university. And then that led me to my current role at eBay, managing all of our global giving and volunteering programs. So I would say really the through line of how I ended up here was always feeling so connected to my community, always wanting to meet the needs that I saw in my community and feeling so empowered and so much joy from that. And now I really want to make my entire career around connecting people to that same sense of purpose to ensure that other people are able to find the same joy of being part of the collective as I do.
So, getting into social impact 2016 to this day, 2026, or this year rather, out of curiosity, what has changed over that duration of time?
Well, I'm a little bit older now, so that's definitely changed. I can't work out as well anymore. But I think this might be a consequence of maybe my maturity, but I think also the field is, I think we talk a lot more about strategy now. And it's a lot more about how are we integrating ourselves into the business in a way that feels really tangible. I think as I've been going from conference to conference, I oftentimes hear the term future proofing, aligning to the business. These are terms that I don't believe that I heard 10 years ago, where it was much more of, I felt volunteering is more seen as a social engagement, as more of building collaborations, as team building, which is still very much there. But I think that the way that we see corporate social impact as a driver for the company rather than just a passenger, I feel like that's a perspective shift that I've found in the past few years.
That's interesting. I had that same perspective. So when I got into the space in 2014, and I was not directly owning any corporate impact roles or anything like that, I was organizing volunteering events outside of the company that I was working at the time. But back in those days, volunteering was definitely seen as more team building, team camaraderie building as well. And fast forward to today, it definitely the conversation has definitely shifted to how do you embed the work inside companies? How do you make the function more durable?
Very much, very much. Which I think is really important because I think that these are no longer programs that are nice to have. They're no longer just extensions of HR, of doing a kit building instead of going to play laser tag. Like, I think there is so much power in building community, helping people find purpose. And also, I've worked with so many amazing volunteer champions and seeing the way that they're able to play and explore in more of um, a low danger way of thinking about. I've helped some people who are maybe they've never managed a team before, and so they're managing teams of volunteers. They're speaking to senior leaders. They're meeting people from different walks of life. Oftentimes, I'm working with people who have maybe never left the city that they were born and raised in to meet people with these different backgrounds and experiences. These programs can be such watering holes for change. And also with the psychological safety oftentimes you have in knowing someone's your colleague and hopefully has similar values to you, I think it allows us to play in ways that we don't allow ourselves to as we enter into really our adulthood.
It's really interesting that you mentioned if you've never led a team before, lead a team of volunteers. How do you see volunteering specifically being used as a professional development tool?
It's really funny, and regardless if you led a team or not, oftentimes when people lead volunteering teams, sometimes they just forget everything that they've ever remembered about leading teams because it feels like, oh, well, I'm not their manager, and so I have no influence over what they're doing or not doing. And I've really seen people come into their own with really tough conversations around maybe you have someone on your team who was really active 2 years ago but now isn't really attending meetings anymore. And they're continuously kind of saying yes to the RSVP for your calendar invite, but they're not really showing up. Maybe it's people who signed up to do something, but they're not really giving it the time and attention that you need. How are you having those conversations with people as a leader? Knowing this is volunteering. And that's something that I talk a lot about to people in how do we have a very similar mission and shared values and having real critical conversations around because this is volunteering, is this the right moment in your life for you to be doing this? I oftentimes find that our ambassadors, who we call changemakers, they're people that are leading the happy hours for their departments. They're oftentimes part of employee resource groups. They're part of so many different things, but it's aligning into what are the actual skill sets that you find could help you in your professional career? What are the ways that you can be feeling both accomplished because you, on a personal level, have felt inspired by the work that you're doing? But also, is there a way that we can incorporate the volunteering role that you have as a leader to really be going towards maybe you want to do a career shift? You want to maybe switch from marketing to finance? Are there ways that we can kind of help you explore different areas of the business that maybe you can find inspiring? And also, I think one of the number one things people miss is that they don't have sponsors at work. I think a lot of people have mentors, they have coaches, but I think one of the wonderful things about a program like Changemakers or so many other programs I've heard from other practitioners is that you have a really specific group that leadership really wants to support. And so it's thinking about how do we help people almost have the audacity to make the ask of saying, okay, Can you talk to this senior leader? Hey, you have this pot of money. What do you want to design? And so I think it's also helping people become more comfortable in what does a decision framework look like if you're given the resources. And if you don't have the resources that you need, how can you learn how to advocate for yourself to leaders who have a shared mission in making something successful? How can you advocate for yourself and for your teams and your community, which I feel like are all skill sets that help people no matter what level that you're at? Because I think I have had so many opportunities that have come from sponsors, and knowing that there are people who believe in me, I think helped me believe in myself. Because if someone I respect so much believes I can do something, that gives me, I would say, more of the empowerment to think, okay, if they see something in me, I must be able to do it, even if I don't see it within myself.
I definitely want to put a pin in that program because I want to come back to it because I feel like there's a lot more to dive into there. But I want to go to something that I really appreciate about you. And you do a fantastic job of really, in a way, coaching people around what it's like to be in this space. You're bringing them along. There's so many people that want to enter the impact space in the corporate sector. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of roles available yet, but I really appreciate the work that you've been doing over the many months that I've seen you do this work of helping people understand what it's like to break into social impact. And I'm curious to kind of dig into some insights that you've learned from the many webinars that you've done around breaking into social impact. Are there one or two things that stand out in your mind in terms of like questions that you tend to get from people that attend the webinars?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I actually want to back up for a second and kind of explain one of the reasons that I feel like I've done so much work in helping introduce people into the sector is because I want more of community members that are supported through corporate impact programs to then be in closer proximity to power. And thinking about how do we take a look at ourselves as an industry and think about how are we really a reflection of the communities that we're supporting. And so that's really where a lot of my thought has come from is myself as a lifelong learner and knowing this industry is moving so fast, how can I be highlighting amazing people like Jeremy, yourself, and so many other different types of folks that are doing so many think pieces? There wasn't really a central place where I feel like people could even find the resources because we're such a new industry. So I think a lot of the common questions are, what exactly did you do to get you into this job? I think that's the number one question is people want, what is the checklist of things that I can do? And something that I've heard from so many recruiters is the landscape right now is so different than when I first started in 2016, where I feel like in the past 10 years, so many of the skill sets that we need in this space have changed. And so I always encourage people, corporate social impact is a job like any other job. And so knowing that there aren't that many jobs out there, what are you doing in your role that supports purpose as a whole? I tell people all the time, the only reason I am able to make impact at eBay is because I have so many change makers internally, not just people who wear the name change makers, but people on our supply chain team, people on our legal team, people on our accounting team that really help make purpose happen. And so I think if you tell yourself the only way that I can make an impact is to have CSR, foundation, purpose, whatever you want to call it in your title, you're really doing yourself a disservice because my role, I very much see myself as the head chef of a kitchen. I'll help put out the menu, but I need my sous chefs. I need my front of house. I need my suppliers. And there's so many things to have and to hold. And we all have a responsibility to be doing goodness in our roles and to really be integrating that into a part of your everyday job. We have many people from the nonprofit space who are also looking at making the jump. And so I always say, take a look at whatever position in your life that you're in. I'm never going to tell people that, oh, you shouldn't be applying for CSR jobs because you got to put yourself out there. But it's really about thinking, what skill sets do I have and where can I lean in a little bit more in, have you ever led a grant making program? Have you done any project management? I think, AI is becoming an increasing part of any corporation. So thinking about what is your AI comfortability and flexibility. And so there's so many different types of skill sets and so many different types of organizations that really prop up corporate social impact. I think there's so many different vendors that are out there. And also thinking about, we have amazing community foundations as well, private foundations, consulting. So I think if you tell yourself that you have to wait until you're in a CSR role to do good, you're really doing yourself a disservice and also potentially putting yourself in a position where you are at the whims of thousands of people that are applying. I never want people to feel like there's something inherently wrong with them and that's why they're not getting interviews. I think with corporate social responsibility, we are working within systems and we're working to change systems. And so we need people that are innovative across all different parts of the company, not just CSR, and to allow the people to really think about exploring and playing and think about, what are the skill sets? What are the places that bring you the most joy? And it may not be a part of a large corporation. It may be an entrepreneur. It may be part of again, a smaller organization. So I think it's about, I always tell people, who feel really disheartened, like that feeling is real. And I've talked to so many people who have been applying for months and months and months. It's thinking about continuing that exploration process, really trying to think about the type of environment to give you joy and curiosity, and also thinking about, there are so many different ways that you can make a purpose in, being part of a nonprofit board and volunteering to be a championing for your CSR team. Just being really creative around, um, does this need to be your full-time job in order for you to identify how can you start today? Because we need those people. This is not something that we can continuously wait for. Oftentimes corporate impact teams, they're understaffed, they are working way above bandwidth, and so thinking about, how can you see yourself in a bigger picture, and a bigger tapestry of, how do you have power and how can you regain power and agency into making a difference into your life every day.
And just to add to that, one of the things I've learned over the years is that there is no straight line into this work. I mean, some people, they go to university, they get some type of degree that is directly translates to corporate social responsibility, and they get right into the space. But for those people, there's more people that either go the nonprofit route or go to a foundation or actually are in completely different departments like HR or even marketing and then make that career transition. So I think it's, to your point, it's really important to realize that there's no straight line. Even look at me. Like, I got into this space not because I had a specific degree or I got lucky and I was in some type of CSR role. I had 0 CSR roles, but I was on different committees. I was organizing volunteering events outside of work, but also at my company as kind of a side passion project. So there's different ways of actually getting into this space. It just, you gotta do something. It doesn't have to be directly at a company. You can do, if you have nobody at your company that's organizing volunteering events, raise your hand, say, "Hey, I want to do a volunteering event. Can I organize that?" And just that could be the first domino that falls.
100%. And I think also one asterisk I do want to put on there is, oftentimes people think, oh, I'm going to volunteer for this. And then oftentimes their leadership will think, well, you have to take on more and more projects in order for you to be promoted, or you have to do this as a stretch project. And so, one thing I'm always advocating for people to do is tell people about what you're doing. I think this is something to share. This is something to celebrate. One thing I've been thinking a lot about recently has been about recognition and about recognizing the people that are taking on those stretch projects, those people that are doing things that are above and beyond, just being really realistic to yourself. Because I think in tandem, we have a lot of people who want to get in. We have people who are already in the industry and very burnt out. How are we ensuring that there is sustainability, not just in our programs, but in the people that are leading these programs? And part of that, I think, is so key is recognition about celebrating those that are building things that will last way beyond them. And one of the beautiful analogies I heard recently was thinking about recognition is like the stars in the night sky. And when you recognize people that are stars, you can also help them recognize the constellations that they're in. And you're really seeing them for how they fit into the bigger picture. And so I'm always telling people, I never want the advice to do more to be the only thing you take away. I think it's about doing a really intense audit of your own life and thinking about where do you have space to maybe take on something that's a little bit more and realizing how can you design your life. Take the same design thinking that you do to your teams, to your projects, and looking internally and making sure that if you are doing things that are above and beyond, there are things that are being recognized and things that you are feeling like is leading to the North Star of where you want to go. And also realizing that sometimes it's okay to no longer do something, right? I think when we're playing, when we're exploring, there is an end point of things that are no longer serving you. And I think that is something that I'm always so aware of is when people take on stretch projects to try something new, and then they feel like they're in this rut of guilt of they're not doing enough and they had volunteered to do it and they had told people. And so then they feel a lot of guilt and then nothing ever happens. And so I think it's really important, especially as leaders, to be having really crucial conversations with people to say, hey, if you're doing more, you might have to do less of something else. What does it actually look like in order to have a balance that feels sustainable for the future rather than just taking on random things all at once, which is going to lead to burnout? And we need people to burn bright, but we don't need people to burn out because there's so much that needs to be done.
Do you have any recommendations on how to do that? How people should go about having that conversation, maybe with their manager, for example, if they're raising their hand and wanting to take on some stretch projects. How do you communicate that you want to do the work and you recognize that that might mean that you might have to take the foot off the gas on another area, but maybe that area is more important to the actual business versus volunteering, for example.
It's a great question, and one that I think about actually quite often. Um, I always encourage people to take a look at their everyday role and think about what are actually some of those skills that you feel like are a little bit holding you back, and thinking about maybe it's project management, maybe it's public speaking, maybe it is working cross functionally, maybe it's advocating for yourself, and to think about in your professional role. That is a gap in an area. And then how do we design a volunteering role that really helps you build out those skill sets? Um, I truly believe if you have a manager who believes in you, I don't think we talk about professional development enough. I think we talk about it sometimes once a year, but I think it one is a really honest conversation with yourself, which takes time. One of the things that I do is every month I actually do an audit on myself on what are the goals that I have for that month. I've been using Whisper, which is an app to do a lot of kind of talk to text around what are the big goals and dreams that I have. And I think I've been thinking recently about being being really audacious with the things that I want and having big dreams and then thinking about what do I really want to lean into? What are my strengths? We've all taken all of these different, corporate quizzes around like what are your strengths and thinking about, as a professional, if you're in CSR, if you're not in CSR, thinking these are the things that potentially are holding me back in my career, and then having conversations around how can I create a volunteering opportunity that caters towards those specific professional development opportunities that I want, and then being audacious enough to make the ask. Because the answer may be no, and that's okay. Because I think jobs, we have all of these ebbs and flows. But I think if it is something that will help you unlock kind of that next level in your productivity and also just being retained as an employee, retention, of course, is always a thing that corporations are thinking about. Um, I think a lot of it is being really honest with yourself. And I think oftentimes people are maybe not as honest with themselves as they want to, because it's a lot easier to just go with the flow, just to continue doing what you've always been doing, than to have really tough conversations, which might require you stepping down from some of the things that you've always wanted to do, but maybe just aren't serving you anymore. And if these programs are really supposed to be embedded in joy and curiosity, those things may come to an end because your life may just be in a different point. And that means that then you can become a mentor to someone else that is in a different stage of life that is looking for that opportunity.
If somebody does want to get into corporate impact, where should they start?
Mm, it's a great question. Um, I feel that impact, we have this very specific language. And it's built by listening to podcasts, reading articles. The number one thing I tell people is these jobs are quick. I feel like I'm connected to all these people, and within 3 days, there's thousands of applications. And so, what I'm always telling people is be curious and follow all of the people who you admire who are talking about this space on LinkedIn, on their Substacks, support them financially if you can. These are oftentimes entrepreneurs that are doing this as a job. And think about, how are you becoming fluent in the language? Oftentimes I find that people only prepare for interviews right before the interview, but there is a certain tone in the language that we use as an industry, and there is so much free content out there that people have done. And so my recommendation is to follow all of the people that you can, be utilizing different AI platforms and helping you stay updated on what are different trends, what is the different industry news, and start relationships with people that you admire. Um, I'm going to be the first to admit this. My connection LinkedIn inbox is a little full, but if I know someone has been interacting with my content and they are familiar with other people, I've had a warm handoff, it's a lot easier for me to be able to kind of spend that time because I know that person has really put in the work. So I always tell people, instead of having informational meetings to get more information, you should have done minimum 10 hours of research about this industry before you talk to any practitioner. Because if you're asking questions from practitioners that you could have just Googled, it kind of feels like a waste of time, just to be really honest. There's very limited amounts of time. And so I always tell people, follow, stay active, build community, and also think about, how can you engage in your community? And are there nonprofit boards that you're potentially interested in? How are you finding these projects that will help be stepping stones for you before you get that interview? Because I think the interview, of course, is a huge stepping stone, but there's so much that you could be doing around shaping your skill set to be prepared for when that opportunity hopefully does come. And a lot of that is just being a voracious reader, a voracious listener, and really allowing yourself to do the research. So when you are speaking to people, they know that you're speaking from a similar place, and you can have much more nuanced and complicated conversations that are way beyond the things that you could probably read online.
You mentioned language in the space, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I am a firm believer that one of the reasons that this field has been held back is because we have too many names for essentially the same work. We have we have corporate social responsibility, then social impact, corporate philanthropy, ESG, sustainability. I do feel like that does in some way hold the field back because we don't have consensus on what the work is, how the work should be uh, operated. What are your thoughts on the language that we use in this sector?
Ooh, it's a great question. This is a question that maybe is for some nighttime happy hour. This is such a new field. I think people are figuring it out, and people want, there's a lot of pride, right? A lot of vanity they may come into. People want to make their own thing, they want to change the language. I agree with you 100% in I think one of the reasons our industry has been able to move so fast is because we're always adapting. But if we're always adapting, that means that no one can recognize us because we're always changing the faces of our programs. And so it provides this mist. I always tell people it's this illusion that we are something different. Um, we need to have some really tough conversations as a sector about who are we and what do we want to be. And what's difficult is that every corporation has a different reason that they do these programs. There's not necessarily one shared mission across every single corporation. So you're looking at so many different types of people. And I think that we need to be brave in really standing with terminology, even when it's questioned by people outside of the industry. I think it's much easier just to change and to adapt than maybe it is to double down on words and language. And it'll take people being really open to working together. So I think I'm pretty naive and optimistic about some things, but I am not so optimistic that we're going to have a specific dictionary of this language. But I do think that people need to be cognizant about the language that they're using and really trying to be intentional about defining the word salad that they're using, especially when interacting with people that are newer to the space. Because it feels like if you're in a conversation with someone and you don't understand the three-letter acronyms that they're using, all of these different things, that's not a welcoming space. We're not going to really open up the tent poles to invite more people into this space if we are using only terminology that we've been using for the past 6 months and always adapting. And so it's also thinking about we have a certain terminology now, which is different for every corporation. What are we doing as people who may be more fluent in the language to demystify that for people that are stepping in? But also thinking about we need to co-create terminology with community and our nonprofit partners. We are not doing these things in an echo chamber, even though I guess sometimes we are. But I would find that the best programs are really co creating with the people that they are in deep partnerships with. I know we talk a lot about how trust is one of the values of who eBay is as a company. And so trust based philanthropy is a journey that eBay Foundation is on, and thinking about being in deep community with our nonprofit partners. You have to think about who is in closest proximity to the problem, and they oftentimes are the ones with the best solutions. And so, thinking about when you have new people come onto your teams, when you're interacting with new people, really listening and understanding the questions that they have to really, are we going to co create a new language? Maybe. I mean, maybe with AI and all of these different things, we're going to co-create new things. But I think we need to continuously think about how do we keep community deeply embedded and in mind as we're either creating a new language or decoding the current language that we have.
Speaking of eBay Foundation, let's talk a little bit about that. So you're a team of one on the employee engagement side. Tell me a little bit about what day to day looks like for you.
Like a kind of a cop out. It's like every day is a new day. But really, my I love my job, and my job is really working with people. And it's identifying who are the superheroes that we have internal to eBay and external to eBay, and weaving together a tapestry of how can those people work together to make the biggest impact possible. I think the term of what is perceived as good could be a lot of different things. And so when you're thinking about weaving a tapestry, you're picking very specific threads for your needs at that time and realizing what do you need to say no to versus what do you need to say yes to. So on an everyday basis, my job is a combination of doing a lot of coaching for our change makers around how do you lead volunteering teams, what do power dynamics look like? What do powerful, deeply transformational relationships look like with nonprofit partners? What are best practices in doing community building and engagement? how am I removing barriers for our change makers as they are doing this on a volunteer basis on their own free times? So a lot of coaching goes into my role, a lot of ideation around what are core moments that the company can wrap ourselves around to inspire a change of action and a change of behavior. A recent example is we have a campaign called One Good Thing, where we encourage all of our employees to give or to give their time and dollars to nonprofits in their community. And then we do a big giveaway to further support the nonprofits that they're working in. And the point of that is not necessarily to get people to volunteer and to give during April, which, yes, is important, but it's to spark, hopefully, a lifelong love of engaging with your community and really being a part of your social fabric. So it's really a month about learning. So I think a lot about learning. I think a lot about behavior change. I think a lot about recognition, about doing these different projects. So leading these huge campaigns, really sharing people's stories, and really helping people feel recognized for the work that they're doing. I also have been doing quite a bit at conferences, and I am by no means an expert in the work that I'm doing, and I'm constantly trying to find community of people that are smarter than me, that have made mistakes that I can learn from. And so it's about touring kind of across and finding different people that I feel inspired by. So it's not just me thinking, okay, well, this is good enough, but it's challenging myself to be bold and to fail. I think we don't talk a lot about failure as an industry. And I think if we take more of a tech mindset, it is innovate, innovate, innovate until you fail. I think fail fast and fail forward is a common phrase. And so I think, we are navigating such new waters. So I spend a lot of my days working with our volunteers, doing best practices about how you interacting with nonprofits in your community, working with our senior leaders and thinking about how do we engage them in ways that feels like they're a part of a solution, that they're able to really identify and know how can they help. And also constantly be learning from other people around me. So many people that have been on this podcast have been such amazing coaches and sponsors of mine. It's all about how do we see the areas that we need to learn, and then how I'm able to take some of those best practices, some of those beautiful stars in the sky, and then bring that back to people at my company so we can understand how can we really stand with our employees, how can we really stand with our nonprofits that we're in deep relationship with to make the biggest change, the biggest impact possible.
When you think about your role at the eBay Foundation and really your entire career in the impact space, where have you failed?
Oh, that is a great question. And I love talking about failure because I think it's so, so important. Let's see, I failed a lot. I think I have a very high standard for myself. So I also think that my capacity for failure is getting to be a lot bigger. I used to never want to fail. And then I realized I need to be more audacious and bold. I have led many campaigns that have failed. No one said anything. No one moved. I thought it was an amazing idea. But I didn't get any buy in from people on the ground. It just felt like something that was coming from corporate. It was coming from a nameless entity that no one knew, and they didn't see the heart and the passion behind it. I think something that I learned really early on in my career is to not make yourself the face of the program. And your programs should be the faces of people that people care about. When people think about employee engagement at eBay, I don't want them to think about me. I want them to think about their local change maker. I want them to think about their local leader. And so I feel a little bit, in hopefully a positive way, that I feel a little bit like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain of I am helping to provide the toolkits and the frameworks, but I never want it to feel like it's led solely by me and or my personality. I think when you have people that are magnetic leaders, sometimes it can mean that other people's efforts are not being recognized. And so I think that is an area I failed at very early on in my career was that I would make programs specific to my own personality. And I would say, well, I don't want to burden other people with this to do more work. And so I'm going to do things because I have more time. This is my full time role. I'm so lucky to be here. And so I ended up doing a lot of the speaking engagements, doing a lot of the frameworks. And I realized if we want to be seen as a grassroots program, I need to be spending my time empowering other people to believe in the program, to feel that they had buy-in. So that's definitely an area where I failed. And I think another area where I failed as well has been growing up, I think, in a mixed Asian American household. A lot of decision making was done by collective around making sure that everyone was on board, not making waves, and then making a decision once everyone felt really good. And I realized with a lot of my programs is when you rely on other people to give their input on everything, that's a lot of cognitive load. You're asking for a lot of people. And it feels very similar to a funny analogy I use of when someone says, what do you want for dinner? And it's like, oh my God, I want so many things for dinner. And at the end of a hard day, you're like, I just want to eat. I just want to spend time with you. And so I've realized as I've grown in my career is giving people that framework of saying, not just what do you want for dinner, but do you want Thai, Mexican, or Japanese? Like giving them that framework so they don't have as much of a cognitive load. And seeing that not necessarily is me taking away their agency, but being really aware of how much bandwidth do people have in order to think about our programs and just being really cautious about how I'm using that social currency. So I think as people coming into this role in nonprofits, I think we are oftentimes people who care deeply about community, about having voices be heard. But I think as you grow as a leader, you realize that there is really a spectrum of decision making by consensus, things that should be done by consensus, but then also decision making that needs to happen about things that need to move fast, and you make the best possible decision with the information that you have and you trust in your decision making to allow for things to happen when they need to. So I think those are two very specific examples of where I personally have failed, partially just due to my own cultural values growing up and realizing that being in a corporate space is very different than, and I would say the culture of some corporate spaces is very different than really the values that I was taught growing up. And also to realize that you need to lean in and lean out, and you can't always make everyone happy. It's really about designing a framework for people to know exactly how can they contribute and to get the highest chance of success, um, without overburdening them and just making this another thing for them to check off their list when they already have such a long list of things to do, not just for their jobs, but also for their personal lives. Because we are people at the end of the day. Our jobs are just a part of who we are. But I hope in these programs that we are helping to change people to transform, to not just be affected in their own in their own professional lives with professional development, but also personally. And what do you really want to be getting out of this? And people want to do minimal effort for maximum impact. So on a daily basis, I think about that, but also on a failure rate. It's something I really had to learn because I really was self sacrificial, which led to me being burnt out, me feeling like I wasn't inspired anymore, and also realizing that I wasn't giving people the agency that they really wanted in order to really be a part of the things that I was creating.
Failure is only failure if you don't take the lessons from that failure and apply it.
Bingo.
I want to go back to the Changemakers program. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. So our change makers are incredible employees from all across the world that raise their hand to really be the hands and feet of the eBay Foundation. So these folks are any level across the company. They could be maybe a few years out of college. They could be, maybe later in their career, but it's people who are really inspired at leading community events and being in deeper relationships to nonprofits in their communities. They're responsible when the eBay Foundation has massive campaigns to think about, okay, eBay Foundation has provided me all of the paint and the canvas in order to make an impact. What is the color that we're going to use? What are the drawings? They're really the people that take the interpretation of these massive campaigns that we do of our values and bring them to life at local offices. Each office is so different. For example, our Malaysia team, they will do full day long volunteering. They will be on a bus for hours to go to a jungle to learn about recycling and restoration work. Well, we have some people who will not leave the office. Like if they do something offsite, you're going to get 3 people. So they're actually the people that are really telling me, hey, Tiana, I don't think this is going to work. And that requires a lot of trust between both the change makers and myself. Ambassador programs can look so different depending on the company that you're at. But I found really a sweet spot is having a small group. We have around 50 co chairs that are really responsible for the overall strategy and the project management of different programs that are happening locally. Those co-chairs, and as a note, I almost always enforce co-chairs because I think it's important to have that leadership reliance, knowing that lives are busy, jobs are busy. Um, they oftentimes will have teams that will vary depending on the size of the site, but those are oftentimes people who say, hey, I only have a few hours a month to be able to do something, but I want to do it. So those co-chairs work with me. I do office hours every month. This is just a really informal time that people can talk about things that they're going through. I'm very excited. We're having our first in-person summit with some of our change makers. So bringing them together to talk about transformative volunteering, to talk about what is your value system, how or what are best practices in working with nonprofits. And so, these change makers volunteer a lot of their time in order to give back to a community. And in return, I hope that they're building different professional skill sets. They are meeting new nonprofits in their community and figuring out what are ways that they can take their volunteer journey further. And also just, hopefully they feel joy, right? Like this for me is so deeply rooted in joy. I tell my change makers a lot, you're doing all this project management, you're doing all this program management, you're having these tough conversations. I really want to make sure at the end of the day, you're feeling really joyful in doing this, knowing that sometimes times are hard, but I want this to feel like something you're opting into and not something that you're being voluntold to do. Because I think there's a lot of times in our careers we're being voluntold to do something. And so I really want for any program that I'm running to feel something that feels restorative and feels that people have such psychological safety that they can help co-create magic with me and help co-create programs. So it's our change makers are really responsible for giving and volunteering events at their office. They're responsible for being my sounding board when I'm thinking about audacious new ideas. They are, when I have senior leaders that are traveling, that are familiar with our programs, such as our board members, they're meeting with change makers, and so they're really my counsel and thinking about as we're leading programs, as we're building something together, how can they help co-create and build with me?
I love how robust this program is, and it brings up a question around durability. One of the things that I really believe that needs to happen in this field in order for it to grow is that we need more impact functions to be durable and not be on the chopping block when times get tough. What do you think needs to happen for more of those functions to be durable based off of what you've learned throughout your career?
I love that question and is actually a question that I think a lot about. And it's really coming down to a few things for me. One of them is I think that if you're in this function, you need to take an entrepreneurial mindset in the programs that you're building. And you need to think about almost building a business. And you are building a startup and you are figuring things out. And you may not have a lot of resources, but you have a lot of champions. And so you have to think about what is that balance of the work that you're doing versus your champions are doing? How are you identifying those opportunities for you to grow? And also realizing if you're taking on more opportunities to grow, you may need to sunset some things. And so you need to have really crystal clear conversations with yourself in that clarity. And so I think that as an industry, I believe that we need to think about ourselves as entrepreneurs a little bit more within our own companies rather than just trying to align with other functions because we are not like other functions. We are very different in the type of work that we're doing. We need to be collaborating deeply with other functions, but I don't think that we can mask ourselves as HR in order for us to survive because corporations are constantly reorging. One thing that I loved was thinking about this concept that organizational structure and your flow chart is not organizational design. And how are we designing our teams for growth? One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is it feels like there's three different roles you can have on a foundation team. You're either the head of the foundation, you're a program manager, or you're more entry level. And to be thinking about if we want teams to be sustainable, how are we designing our teams for growth? How are we ensuring that people to grow don't need to leave their job to hop to another job in order to grow? And so thinking about as teams, how are we seeing ourselves as a constantly changing entity to be thinking about design as a team? And to be thinking about how are we empowering other teams and making ourselves so essential to the function of the business that it feels like, wow, for the amount of work they do, the amount of impact, this is really cheap. They're innovative, they're trying new things because we are also working with a lot of different social issues that have been around for a really long time. And so if we're staying with the same approach that we had 20 years ago when we were called community relations, it's not going to work now. So I admire people who have these legacy programs, right? Who have these amazing partnerships, but we need to be challenging ourselves. And to challenge ourselves, we need space to be creative, to be fun. And I think that oftentimes our teams, we will be at 150%. I think that is so important, especially if you're a leader of a team, to be thinking about yes, we will have seasons of work, but there also needs to be space for creativity, for design, and for joy that should be integrated into your workflow on an everyday basis. And so that's what I'm always kind of thinking about is what is that general container for people to be entrepreneurial, to be scrappy, to be figuring out all of those different things. And I think until we figure out how to do that as an industry and to really own that mindset, I don't think we can grow if we're just thinking of ourselves as like those three different roles and that's all you can do. So you need a hop, skip, and a jump to your competitor in order to get that thing. So I think there's so many conversations that need to be had. And also, I'm increasingly concerned, honestly, on the burnout rate of people in our industry. So I think that we cannot overextend ourselves over and over again to think about something as being temporary. I think we need to have and define that tension of having a really specific strategy and also being open to change. It's something that we're navigating through. I'm personally navigating through, but I think it's giving yourself the time and space to think and to see thinking as something that is important. I oftentimes think in capitalism, in all of the isms, I sometimes measure my output in emails, in meetings, in all of these things, but to also really be treasuring that deep thinking, that strategic thinking, those generative conversations, that is so important to growing a program and being really honest with yourself. Do you have the time and the space on a regular basis to be in that mindset? Do you have people that encourage you to be in that mindset to constantly be taking a design thinking perspective to the things that you're doing rather than just doing it and not having any time and space to actually do anything different because you're just so tired and exhausted?
Let's end with this. What's one habit or mindset that you think is holding the field back?
I've been thinking about this phrase of choosing to be radically human in this age of technology and thinking about people want to build community in really authentic ways and thinking about we're on our phones, we're on Zoom, we're a part of 17 million Slack groups, we're having Teams chats, all of these things. how can our programs create community amongst people? I think we need to think of ourselves as community builders first, as people that are identifying what is our community as a corporation, what is the community to our employees, and where are the actual spaces where our employees are living and working. And so I would love to see our industry really think about how can I become a better community builder in terms of facilitating space, encouraging psychological safety, thinking about building teams, empowering people, identifying who the stars are, helping figure out how do they fit into the constellations. And so I would love to see community building not just as a term that you see at these giant conferences on PowerPoints of what people did, because I don't think you can ever say I built community. I think community is a evolving entity and is something that we all have a responsibility to grow. And so I would love for people to think about your programs and are they facilitating community building in all different ways? And how are you yourself thinking about how am I becoming a better community builder? Because that I think will help us really future proof this industry as we're going on is finding and identifying the gaps about how can we all work together in order to enable good. Wherever we are, if that means that it's in your title, it's not in your title, I think we as an industry need to think about who are the stars and how can we help them identify the constellations that they're in.
Tiana, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your leadership in this space. And thank you for joining me and sharing your career journey and all the great things you're doing at the eBay Foundation.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
This episode is brought to you by Social Impact World, the intelligence layer for corporate impact. To learn more, go to socialimpactworld.com. I'm Jeremy Brown. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Behind the Impact.